taking time out with Premier Sports Officials Association. Sean Johnston from Omaha, Nebraska. Once again, meeting with Nate Neuhaus, Director of Officials for NSAA here in Nebraska. And the topic today is going to be the year in review when it comes to football. So Nate, thanks once again for joining Time Out with PSOA. Overall, how did you think the season went for you and the state of Nebraska?
Don, thanks for having me on again. It's always a pleasure to sit down and discuss football and the world of officiating with you. Appreciate all your coverage and all that you do for our officials across the state of Nebraska and in Omaha. So yeah, again, really appreciate it. I thought the year was successful. Every year comes with contention and maybe frustration with regards to officiating or sportsmanship issues between teams. Nonetheless, a good year, a good solid year, a lot to build on.
You know, what we're going to do here, we got about 5 different questions. First one is the new rules from 2023. We had the player towel colors restrictions were changed, intentional grounding clarification, and probably the biggest one was the basic spot enforcement. How did you feel the new rules in 2023 were enforced and accepted by the coaches and players?
No news is good news. Honestly, Sean, we've talked about this in the past. I didn't really hear anything negatively or positively with regards to these rules change. If we look specifically at the player towels and the color, once again, very easy to implement and officiate. I hope that's a step in the right direction to eliminate other adornment rules that seem to be causing officials, players, and coaches some contention. We eliminate those. I think it just gets easier. Intentional grounding, I'm not sure anybody noticed the difference in terms of from the spectator standpoint. Our officials handled it very well. The coaches understood it as also very well. No issues there. Basic spot enforcement. That one early in the season, we had questions and maybe some mistakes. But once we worked through it, you and I worked to develop that cheat sheet that officials could carry in their pocket throughout the game. I didn't see any issues. So I think all of the rule changes were positive and maybe a step in the right direction leading to some other rule changes in the future.
Yeah, and that sort of transitions us to the next portion. I know you go to the NFHS meetings with proposals. You know, what proposals do you recommend in 2024, and where do you get your proposals that you bring to that meeting?
Each state association has a member that sits on that rules committee. I actually wrote 2 rule change proposals this year. Rules change proposals come from the state associations, depending on what they feel like is a necessary or recommended conversation. The 2 proposals that I wrote are with regards to adornments. I would like to see the restrictions that pertain to sweatbands and where they are worn removed. If you're not aware of the rules, you can't wear sweatbands above your elbow or on your calf. I don't know that we need to restrict those type of situations, so I wrote a proposal to remove that. I also wrote a proposal to remove the restriction that a wrist coach cannot be worn on the belt. I wish I was a little more positive or optimistic that they will be passed. I've written these proposals in the past, and they haven't gotten out of the subcommittee level. So we'll see. I know I'm not the only one on the committee with the same interest in these rules changing. I'm probably not the only one that wrote a proposal. There'll probably be a couple more that are worded differently. And then beyond that, year in and year out, we see rules change proposals with regards to first down. Should it be an automatic first down? Should it not? We do have timing rules that are discussed every year. We have rules regarding fumble. Last year was a kind of a hot topic. So each year, you'll notice a new focus of attention. A couple years ago, it was the free blocking zone, and We did work on that. Now I think people feel comfortable with the free blocking zone. We did a lot of work on intentional grounding. That took 2 or 3 years, and that was now implemented. So we'll see what the new focus is in January when I go to Indianapolis.
When you do meet in your subcommittees, what is it that goes into consideration? Is it safety first? Is it enforcement? Or is it to keep up with what the coaches are wanting the game of football to look like?
A little bit of all of that. We do review back to the survey results that I sent out. Hopefully you received that, as well as the other officials across the state. That's important to get that data. We like to know what the officials are thinking. We want to know what the coaches are thinking. They get the same survey. Safety platform is also a number one priority when discussing whether a rule should or should not be changed. Advantage, disadvantage is also considered, whether or not this rule change is necessary, and if it changes, what does it do to the landscape of penalty enforcement? Is it fair and equitable? And then many times the third prong is this something that is necessary in high school, and can high school officials officiate it? It's different at our level than it is at the college and professional level. We have less officials on the field. We have maybe different requirements to be an official. So we also keep that in perspective, and that's why sometimes you see the NFL rule to the college rule to the high school rule a little bit different. I get that question from time to time. Why is the rule different from college to high school? And sometimes that's the reason. It can't always be the same. We like to be as consistent as possible. So generally it is a lengthy discussion about, is it necessary? Does it create an advantage, disadvantage? And does it create any kind of safety issue?
That's good insight for officials to know. There's a lot more that goes into rules and rules changes than, hey, this is a good idea, let's try it. It's a process. It is definitely a process.
And to expand on that a little bit, there's been some rule change proposals written in the past where conceptually everybody's in favor of it, but it takes some time to get the wording correct, and maybe we overthink that process. But the editorial committee has to really sit down and make sure it's worded so that it doesn't contradict a rule in another place and create more confusion. And so sometimes that takes a year or two to be implemented or worded properly, which to me, that says a lot about this committee. They want to get it right. We don't just blindly or arbitrarily approve a rule change and then try to figure it out. Let's figure it out before we implement it to remove any of that confusion.
Absolutely. From a local supervisor here in Omaha, Nebraska, to a statewide supervisor, we have a lot of tasks, and one of them is the education and dissemination of the rules, of the mechanics. The next one is assigning. I know I met with all of my referees after the season. Number one, just to see if they're going to be back for 2023. Good news for Nate. All of my crews will be back, and I'm in the process of creating 2 new ones. And now the next process for me when it comes to assigning is availability. And it's not just every Friday, but what are officials able to do work-wise, family-wise with travel? And now from there, I get that all sorted out. Then I take a look at my master schedule. And some of the criteria I do is I want to make sure all of my crews get a potential top 10 matchup in a season, or 2 top 10 matchups in a season, so they have something to look forward to. While also keeping in mind, I don't want a crew seeing a team twice in a season. I know sometimes that's unavoidable. And then the other thing is I do keep in mind of what does NSAA look to do with the crew in postseason. So if a crew is eligible for 11 person versus 8 person. I might give crews more 8 person games, more 11 person games. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes when it comes to making assignments at the PSOA level. At the state level, what do you take into consideration when it comes to postseason assignments and from round 1 to round 2, quarterfinals and semifinals?
You could probably speak to any one of our directors in the office. Volleyball director assigns the postseason for volleyball, and basketball does for basketball, and wrestling does for wrestling. And I bet our responses would be very similar. Assigning officials in the postseason, as I'm sure you've noticed during the regular season, is one of the toughest things we do. If you do it right, in my opinion. Sure, you can just arbitrarily throw games out there and throw crews on games, and maybe you put teams or officials in games that aren't the right assignment. And there's a lot of reasons for what does that mean. Conflict of interest. We want everybody to be successful. We don't want to walk a crew onto the field and before the game is even kicked off, there's some animosity or contention amongst the teams or the teams and the officials because of a previous assignment. So as we get into the postseason, my intent specifically with regards to football is get every crew one game. They've earned it. They deserve it. They're capable and qualified to do that. Now, what round is many times out of our control, as much as because we don't know where the games are going to be played. I could probably do assignments today and they'd look completely different. Eventually, you just have to pick a crew to put on a specific game and then see how the playoffs evolve. This year, we had 115 crews apply for the postseason, and all but one of them got one game. And I spoke to the crew chief of the crew that did not get the game, and he understood the process. I had them penciled in a couple different times to get a game, and then because of wins and losses and conflicts of interest, it didn't fit, unfortunately, and travel or distance or geographics. There's a lot of things that went into it. So it wasn't deliberate. It was unfortunate. And so it usually takes round 1, round 2, quarterfinals to get everybody one game. And then hopefully as we can then piece together who's going to work the semis and finals, then you'll see a handful of crews get 2 games. Now, that doesn't always hold true because in certain parts of the state, there's just more games and we had to use crews more often. So there isn't really a science to it other than see how the playoffs play out, take into considerations, conflicts of interest, locations, capabilities, abilities, feedback from schools, feedback from observers, feedback from a signer such as yourself or the other signers across the state. And at the end of it, with all of those variables in mind, it still comes down to one person making a decision. And unfortunately, I don't always have a good answer as to why crew X got a game and crew Z did not get a game, or they got a better game, in my opinion, than I got. To me, they're all games. Even the first round game, people want to use that as a measuring stick. I've seen some first round matchups, regardless of seed, regardless of anything, that is going to be a great football game. And I've seen some quarterfinals and semifinal games. You're like, not sure that's going to be a very good game. And so I really kind of try to throw as much of that out as I can and focus on let's give officials games. Let's give them a chance to evolve because they've earned it. They've worked hard. I've got good feedback from a variety of different things. And I know that's a lot of words to try to explain the process. Unfortunately, I just don't know if there is a perfect system ever for assigning officials. Sometimes it comes down to a decision.
Yeah, I know. I always tell not only my crew that I work with, but all my crews that have the honor of working a postseason game, we have to control what we can control. And what we can't control is our mechanics, is our judgment, is our communication, every snap, every game. And every game does count. Otherwise, they wouldn't put a schedule together and put criteria of who's going to play in the playoffs. And I know it's sort of our call sign at the end of we're only as good as our last call. And officials, whatever assignment you are given, you just got to remember that is the most important assignment of that day, and take advantage of it. With that
That's,
being said, go ahead, Nate.
and I actually have a report of the last 10 to 12 years of how each crew, based on the crew chief for that particular year, was assigned, how they've been assigned throughout the years. Last year, you got a D1 first round. The year before that, you got a D2 second round. And I can go back in years, and I do try to review that. Now, at some point, there's just so many variables. So I try to give people different classes, different rounds, different opportunities. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But as you mentioned, every game's a big game. Every game's important. You might get a big call that you weren't ready for, so you got to be at your best every week, no matter the round, the class, or the assignment. They're all important.
And then just to close up on this topic, you talk about semifinals and championship games. Those crews stood out, got a second game, maybe even a third game of the postseason. Overall, how did those crews work those semifinals and championship games to represent yourself in the NSAA?
Even beyond the semifinals and finals, I'm extremely pleased with the postseason because of the feedback I received from the 4 or 5 different assigners across the state, the 10 different observers, and even the schools or officials that I hear from. The playoffs were positive. I got numerous emails throughout the 4 weeks of the playoffs from schools complimenting the officials that they had on that particular game. I also always get emails with some negative feedback, and it's good to hear the positive as well. I understand that works both ways. It's good to hear it on both ends of it so that we know what to address and how to focus our attention. And so I'm pleased with the postseason. I think that when we do go out and watch games, and a lot of them are on social media or on TV, I see the officials working hard, working their mechanics. And that's important. That's probably the 2 most important things when you get into a game. The rest of it will go as necessary based off your calls and your game management. But work hard, give us good mechanics. The rest of the game will fall into place. So I really appreciate what the officials did during the regular season and postseason this year.
Good news. So now that the 2023 season is done, there's really not much time to breathe as we prepare for the 2024-2025 cycle. You want to talk about sort of what is now in your plate, so to speak, when it comes to the classification of schools and then creating a 2-year cycle schedule with districts, with rivalries, with requests that schools give you, and what all goes into making these next 2 years of football schedules.
It's actually what I've been working on all morning. The declarations were to be submitted. The declaration is in reference to the school must declare, am I going to play 11, 8, or 6-man football? Those declarations were due November 30th. Now we're collecting enrollment numbers that the schools have submitted to the NDE, Nebraska Department of Education. They will provide us with those enrollment numbers. Those numbers will hopefully be approved, and we have those submitted and ready to go for the board meeting tomorrow. Once those numbers are approved, I can combine the enrollment numbers with the declaration numbers, and I should be able to have classifications posted on Monday, December 11th. Classifications will sit for a few days, up to maybe even a week. We actually have to give schools the opportunity to opt up or down in class. They can't change their declaration, but they can opt up or down in class if they feel the need. Once we confirm the classifications, within a couple days, I should be able to have districts assignments posted so schools know what districts they're going to be in. Then we will open up the priority list submission for schools to list the 6 to 7 schools beyond their district assignments that they want to play. Once we have all that information in place and collected, starting in January, we will then sit down and start to put together the schedules. Many times the district schedules are already determined for us, but beyond that, we'll start to determine the non-district games, put them on paper, put them on a schedule, weeks 1 through 9. That takes mostly the month of January, and all of that will be finalized and posted to our membership on February 7th. That's a Wednesday. So it's a pretty hectic 4 to 6 weeks here coming up in preparation and during the process of getting this scheduling done.
Yeah, I know February 7th, when it comes to crew chiefs who get their own contracts, associations such as ours, it's a very busy morning, February 7th. But it's a whirlwind, takes about 30 minutes, and the contracts are out for the next 2 years of football. And then we start. Go ahead.
And I just want to mention that I know it's a hectic morning. And there's been some talk about what can we do differently, or how can we do things differently, and how do we solve that problem. Here's how we solve that problem bluntly. We need more officials. More officials leads to more crews, leads to more coverage. Supply and demand. If we had more crews and more officials available, it wouldn't be such a race to fill your schedules as a high school. You could take your time because you don't have to chase down the 3 or 4 crews that are available. Maybe we'd have 8 to 10 crews available in that area on that week. So we need more officials. That's my ploy. That's my request. As officials or as individuals, if you're listening to this, we need you. The NSAA needs you. The membership needs you. Sports in general need more officials.
And that goes into, what we could do as a group. When does NSAA registration actually open for the 2024 football season? And sort of what does NSAA have in mind when it comes to the off-season preparation to get those officials numbers up and find out who's going to be back and how we could recruit new officials?
Generally, registration for the upcoming year of officials will open in June. So this year is 23-24. We actually just closed the winter sports officials registration. So now really the only official that can register are for officials for this spring, baseball, soccer, track, so on and so forth. When that registration closes, then officials registration for this school year will be done. We archive information. We shut things down for a while so that I can work with our programmer and developer and make changes if we need to make any changes leading into next year. Maybe the registration process, the testing process, the rules meeting process, the late fee process, deadlines. We need a few weeks to update all of that to get it ready for the subsequent year. So generally, we try to have registration open by June 5th, June 10th, somewhere in that range, depending upon how many changes we're making. I've got a couple of initiatives in mind that I'd like to implement moving forward after we discuss it a little more in depth in the office. It's my intent to remove obstacles from individuals that want to become officials. I don't like deadlines. I don't like late fees, but unfortunately, without deadlines and late fees, we don't know where our numbers are at and what to provide for our school. So we have deadlines and we have late fees because we have to provide that information in a timely manner to our schools. But I'm working on some work that may change the process. So stay tuned for that. And then the information needs to be disseminated to our officials, the rules changes, clinic dates, summit dates, educational opportunities for clinics. All of that gets organized, and hopefully throughout the summer, officials are getting geared up. I would like to note that in the fall, our fall sports, football, softball, and what am I missing? Volleyball, sorry, we're up. We were up in officials in all 3 sports. Now, what I mean by up, that maybe was only 5 to 10 to 15 to 20, but we're up. We're no longer maybe losing officials at the rate that we once were. Looking initially at our winter sports, wrestling, basketball, swimming, we're up slightly. slightly up. So we're headed in the right direction. We're trending in the right direction. We're doing all the right things with assigners and teachers and recruiters and outreach. I think we're doing the things that we need to do to recruit officials. Now we need to focus on retention. I don't want to lose that first year official in year 1, year 2. We can get them to 3, 4, 5. We got them. We're in. They're educated. They're committed. They're comfortable. We just got to do what we can to hopefully promote sportsmanship so we don't run these new officials off.
Yeah, and sort of to close out this podcast, I'm going to talk about sort of what our association is going to do with all of that. So number one, we're going to send out an email to all of our football officials from the 2023 season and ask them, are you going to be back in 2024? And are you going to want to work varsity football? Because I'm going to need to know that before February 7th, so I know how many contracts I could actually take on as an association. The second thing we are going to do is we're going to have our Jamboree in May 31st and June 1st in Omaha, Nebraska. So right now I'm going to be looking for 7 varsity football officials. I'm looking for 2 more referees to start 2 new crews. And that way we have my goal is 15 varsity crews for the 2024 and 2025 season. One way I've been doing it is I've been going out to high schools. So if you're listening to this and you would like our group to go out and talk to your athletic department, to your students, especially the seniors, we are looking for new officials, and we have the education component to teach the officials the mechanics, the signals, the rules. So Nate talked about the unsportsmanship behavior. I have found the better we do our job as officials, the less unsporting behavior we see. So it's a 2-part system. Coaches are going to control their players. Administrators are controlling their fans. Officials, we have to control our work ethic. As long as we communicate clearly and are communicating the correct information, that unsporting behavior is very low. And when we do see unsporting behavior, it's typically in connection with officials not doing something perfect. Yeah, I wish we all could be perfect. We're not, so we got to still treat each other humanly. But if you are thinking about becoming an official, no matter what sport, reach out to NSAA, reach out to myself, and we will get you connected, 1 with the assigner and 2 with the education, so you have success from the very beginning. Nate, do you have any final closing words before we end this podcast?
I'll take the moment and just say thanks. Thanks to you, Sean, for what you do for the officials in Nebraska. There's many people like you, different assigners across the state, different educators across the state that work with officials. Appreciate the work that everybody is doing. I do feel confident that there is a concerted effort by a lot of different people to improve our officiating abilities as well as officiating numbers. Not one person can do it themselves. It takes all of us. It takes effort. It takes commitment. And part of that even trickles into school administrators, coaches, fans, spectators. We all have an active role in this, not just a handful of people that maybe are in the forefront. So I want to say thanks to everybody for their efforts, making football a successful season. And I look forward to the future of officiating in football specifically, but in a more broad statement, all sports. Appreciate the officials and what they do. Hopefully, if you ever got a chance to attend one of our state championship events in the fall, we have an appreciation statement that we read before every game, and we ask officials to stand and be appreciated and recognized for all that they do. And that's beyond the NSAA official. Officials at the youth level are also valuable because hopefully that's the future of officials. So again, just thanks, appreciative, gratitude to everybody.
All right. Well, sounds like the 2023 year was a success. Let's just keep it going and make 2024 even better. Thank you for taking time out today with us, Nate. And officials, remember, you're only as good as your last call.